Hello and thank you for joining us. I'm Rod Grams and this is Washington Report. Now, when the voters ushered in a new Congress last November, they did something that they had never done before, and that was elected a freshman Senate class made up entirely of Republicans. Now, the Senate sweep is a clear sign that times have changed in Washington. Except for a conservative who took the seat of another conservative, all 11 freshman senators you could call more conservative than the senators they replaced, and all of us are committed to delivering fundamental changes in the way that government operates. And my special guests today are two of my newly elected fellow freshmen, and I'm pleased that they could join us here to share the freshmen's perspective on what's happening in Congress. And I'd like to welcome Senator Jon Kyl of Arizona, who moved to the Senate from the U.S. House of Representatives, and also transplant surgeon turned senator, Senator Bill Frist of Tennessee. And gentlemen, welcome very much, and I know your faces are going to be adorning the news very much over the next few years, but I want to take a special welcome to both of you for taking your time to join us.
Thank you, Rod.
And talking about, freshmen in the U.S. Senate, and I'll start with John and then we'll move to Bill, but what led you here? What kind of motivated you to say that maybe one voice can make a difference and really take that big step in running for the U.S. Senate?
Rod, I practiced law in Phoenix for about 20 years, and toward the end of that was representing a lot of clients who had business with the government, and ended up being the chairman of the Phoenix Chamber of Commerce. In that position, I found out firsthand how the government's regulations were stifling our free enterprise system and opportunities in this country. And when my predecessor decided not to run for re-election in the House of Representatives, I ran for that seat and was re-elected 3 times, serving with you in the House of Representatives. Ran last year for the U.S. Senate and was elected, and that's my path to politics here in Washington, D.C.
But again, it was some of that concern of what was going on and hopefully the opportunity and the chance to make a difference.
That's right, and I think it's the same kind of concern that most Americans in this last election felt. One of the big messages, at least from my part of the country, was get the government off our backs. It's not been that good of a bargain these last several years. We'd rather try to do more of this ourselves.
I always tell a story about a fellow who came out to me in the middle of a street during a parade and grabbed me by the shoulder, and he says, "Get the government off my back, get your hands out of my pocket, and deliver my mail on time. That's all I ask." And I think that's kind of simple. But
That sounds it.
Bill, you took the one step, and not through the House of Representatives, as John and I had the opportunity to serve in the House, but your first foray, so to speak, into politics was right for the U.S. Senate.
It is, right. And it was really just 3 years ago that on an everyday basis I was doing heart surgery and lung surgery and doing heart transplants and lung transplants. And I remember so clearly just sitting around in the surgeon's lounge between cases, being very critical of the direction of this country, that it was moving in a more liberal direction with more and more taxes, more and more of our freedoms being taken away from us each day. And I looked around, I complained to the other surgeons, and at that point in time said, I, as an individual, if I stay focused and stay disciplined, will be a United States Senator, and if I work very hard at that job, I will help change the direction of this country. So I took that big leap from being a physician, the first practicing physician in the United States Senate in over 60 years, to becoming a United States Senator for a period of time.
And a big step because you did go up against a longtime incumbent, Democratic incumbent, Senator Sasser of Tennessee. And a lot of the traditional wisdom is it's awfully hard to unseat an incumbent, but it's that focused effort I think that you talked about.
And the contrast was there, and the reasons for doing it were to help change the direction of the country, moving in the wrong direction. And on the one hand, we had my opponent who had been here in the United States Senate for 18 years, was regarded as a Democratic leader, who was very liberal compared to what the common sense views were in Tennessee at the time. And I reflected that voice and continue to reflect that voice in the Senate.
What's your opinions, John, first, of the Senate so far? I know we can compare it to the House, but and I know Bill's going to have a little bit different perspective, but the feelings of your looking at the Senate now that we've been here for 6 months plus?
Well, we've talked about the frustration of not being able to accomplish everything overnight, and after 40 years of control by a much more liberal Congress, it's going to take a long time for us to replace many of these regulatory laws, and that clearly is a frustration. I think it's helpful to know that to do anything in the Senate, to get any bill to a vote, 60 senators have to agree to allow the vote. And that means that a lot of things that we'd like to do either don't come to a vote or have to get watered down before they come to a vote. But I'll just mention one quick thing that all 3 of us participated in when we first got here in January. and looked at the rules, we said, these rules are out of date. We need to make some changes. And so our 11 freshman Republicans put together a change in the rules packages here as to how people get to be committee chairman. We put term limits on the committee chairman. I did some other, I think, important things, and just last week we were able to get that, get almost all of that through our own conference. So we've already made a difference, I think.
And it's not to throw out a lot of the things that are held as reverent or respected in the Senate, but really it's to change and distribute the power more rather than concentrate it into the hands of the few, really to break down some of the old traditions that we felt were bad.
I think that's right. You know, my analogy coming out of the medical profession is that in November, this past November, we did the heart transplant. We had a patient who over 40, 45 years had gotten sicker and sicker and sicker, moving in the wrong direction. In November, we had these elections, we put a new heart in, and now we're in that recovery phase, and that has to be a very aggressive phase to get that patient better. And so we can't do it overnight. You can do the operation overnight, but to rebuild that patient takes days and weeks and months and years. I, being an outsider, being really the only true outsider, even in our freshman class, having never really been in Washington, D.C. and never been a part of government, think that we're moving pretty well. I've been fairly encouraged when you look back over the last 6 months, you compare it to what we campaigned on, streamlining government, making it more accountable, making it smaller, getting regulations off our back. I'm reasonably encouraged, at least, that we're beginning to turn that ship a little bit, and now we need to just keep turning it more and more and then driving it ahead.
I think you're right. It's, you know, things that happened over 40 years cannot be turned overnight. This is a big ship, and it's going to be awfully hard. Talk about the filibuster threat. John, you mentioned, you said 60 votes. I've always kind of looked at the two houses, the House and the Senate, as the House is geared for the majority, because the majority can really set the agenda. But in the Senate, it's more geared for the minority, and just by the fact that you said we need 60 votes, and with only 54, that is a very fragile majority, and is in the respect of a lot of the legislation sometimes doesn't come out the way we'd like to see it.
Rod, I think that's very true, and it's frustrating for those of us who now feel that we have a mandate from the last election to get a lot of things passed. But if we just reflect back on last year, and I know we're going to be talking about Medicare in a minute with the expertise from Dr. Frist here, we can't avoid that. Last year, the Senate, with about 40 or 41 votes, stopped the Clinton health care bill, which most of us didn't like one bit, and I think the majority of the American people are glad that we didn't adopt that government-run health care system. But that was a minority of people stopping that from coming to a vote. So the rule can be helpful in preventing bad legislation from being adopted. When we want to get something passed, it makes us work extra hard to get it passed. That's probably a good check and balance. Our founding fathers turn out to have been pretty smart about how they set this process up. But again, I'll reiterate, it still makes it kind of frustrating when you're trying to get something through.
And again, talking as freshmen, and I think, Bill, you referred to it in your opening, that you said that we did give the voters a clear choice. There was a clear choice between yourself and the candidate you ran against, incumbent Senator Sasser, and John, in your race and in mine. And I think that's really what the American voter, because I believed it was a very surgical type election. When you look at the new members of the Senate, you looked at 48 freshmen in the House. All 48 were returned, except one. He lost a primary, but another Republican took his seat. And I think that's unprecedented in history, too, that all 48 members were returned of one class. So I think we really reflect a general trend that this country is going in. Would you agree?
Oh, I think so. I think so, absolutely. And I think the American people feel it for the first time in a long time, that in these elections in November, they knew, they felt that this country was going in the wrong direction, and they felt that they could make a difference. So in the same vein that brought us to this body this year, that we could make a difference, I think the American voter, the American citizen felt that for the first time in a long period of time, that they could make a difference by electing people such as us to this body.
And before we take a break, I think you sum it up. I don't think Americans want us to throw out things that are good about government. There are a lot of good things that we could talk about. But I think what they wanted to get at was what they had perceived to be how government was going bad, and get rid of some of the abuses and the bureaucracies and really clean up the place, but then end up with a good, strong federal government rather than one that is wasting their tax dollars.
Well, I agree with that, although I will look askance at making the federal government stronger. I know that isn't the sense in which you meant it. The sense in which I know you and I have worked together is to have programs that are worthwhile, workable, exactly, and usually that means, at least from our point of view, trying to return some of that power back to the states and the local governments to actually run the programs.
We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back to talk with our special guest Senators Jon Kyl of Arizona and Senator Bill Frist of Tennessee right after this.
In a life-threatening emergency, you should know what to do. Say a loved one exhibits unusual symptoms. The first thing to do... Clear! No, the first thing to do is pick up the phone and dial your local emergency number.
Call 911 first.
Right.
How about mouth-to-mouth?
I don't think so. To learn more about life-saving techniques, contact your Red Cross.
Remember how good it felt the first time you gave 5? Well, now there's another way to give 5. Set a goal to give more. 5 hours a week and 5% of your income to the causes you care about. It'll make you feel like a winner every day of your life. So give more. Give 5. Call 1-800-55-GIVE-5.
And again, welcome back. Thanks for joining us once again. Our special guest tonight, again, Senator Jon Kyl of Arizona and Senator Bill Frist of Tennessee. And again, gentlemen, thank you for being with us to give a little bit of a perspective of how it looks from a freshman's point of view. And one thing that we've talked about is changing a lot of things, overhauling, making it stronger, preserve, protect, improve. And I think when we say those 3 words, Medicare comes to mind. I mean, that's one of the most important things facing this Congress and this Senate right now. And I know, John, you went around your state on a couple of occasions holding town meetings specifically aimed, along with Senator John McCain, at Medicare. Had huge crowds that came, and I know I've talked to people in Minnesota. But what was some of the reaction? And I know a lot of them have heard these scare tactics of what's going to happen. And but when you can get the information to those out there that are concerned, a lot of those worries dissipate, and they begin to understand really that we have to do this to save the system.
That's exactly the experience that we had in Arizona. By the way, if we had done this in the winter months, we'd be talking to a lot of folks from Minnesota, because
that's true.
We see a lot of your constituents in Arizona, and we love to have them visit.
They leave a few dollars there.
Well, they're great people, and we enjoy it. There's one community in particular, Rio Verde, must be all Minnesota folks, and I've always enjoyed visiting with them. In any event, we went around all over the state to talk about the Medicare problem and cited the trustees' report. And the Medicare trustees, as you know, came out with the strongest warning yet this past year that if we don't begin to reform that system immediately, it's going to go broke in about 7 years. And under the law, benefits cannot be paid to people. So it's got to be strengthened and protected. And for that reason, we have to get right at it. And we've been working on that, of course. But I was very impressed by the fact that as soon as you begin discussing that report and demonstrating the seriousness of the problem, that seniors are very quick to grasp the fact that something needs to be done. There are a lot of senior citizens in Arizona. And I really think we're over that hump. I think the majority of them now, at least the ones we've talked to, are well aware that something needs to be done, and they've gotten right to the question of, okay, now what do we do to preserve and protect and strengthen Medicare? So I am encouraged by the fact that the seniors seem to be right up on the issue, and as soon as you have the conversation with them, they're ready to roll up their sleeves and go to work on a solution.
Bill, what about in
Well, my response again is gathered from having taken care of thousands of Medicare patients who I stay in touch with. And as I travel across Tennessee, my experiences are very similar to John. I think that further step, once you make the case that really we're trying to preserve Medicare just 7 years from now, that for all too long politicians have looked in the short term, and now for the first time we're willing to look on in after the year 2000, as we did with balancing the budget. The people are not only concerned, but are enthusiastic, and I'm speaking of our senior citizens, to participate in that process. And then when we take that next step and say, no, we're not cutting Medicare, we're going to allow Medicare to grow at 7% a year or 6.4% a year. That's not a cut. That we're going to be spending $4,800 a year this year per beneficiary, and in the year 2002 we're going to be spending $6,700. That's not a cut. No, it's not going to grow at 10%, but it's going to grow at about 6.4%. people begin to understand and say, yes, bring us to the table so we can help figure out solutions to these fundamental problems.
I've just figured it out in using a car as an example. If the car costs $20,000 today, and if it went up, that amount that Medicare is going to rise, in 7 years that same car would cost $32,000 plus. Now people would be upset if they thought price had gone up that high. Yet this is what is going to happen in Medicare. I mean, we are going to be spending that much more. And while if you would complain on one hand, the other side is saying that that's not enough. But I believe there's so many ways that we can deliver services in a more economical way. A lot of overhaul in the system of Medicare itself, whether it's experimental devices or just improved devices that don't get FDA approval, many other things that can, again, deliver those services that we feel are so important. But we've got to be able to do it at a better price.
You know, that's one of the keys to it, I think, is making sure that the choices that people have had in the past to the quality of care that you alluded to, and the delivery of care in the way that they want it delivered are not reduced. We need to expand the choices rather than reduce them. And the crisis, ironically, has forced us to begin to examine how we can do that, and we found that there are a lot of alternatives out there, a lot of options. And if we can make all of these options available to people, in effect, the private market, that competition that will result, will help to drive down the price. And we don't, as it turns out, have to end up spending as much as we've been spending on Medicare, and yet the care that people receive can be just as good. Dr. Frist certainly knows the statistics in the private sector. The costs are not increasing at near the rate that they are under this government program, and if we can just keep the growth in costs to the same as they are in the private sector, we can achieve the strengthening and the protection of the program that we need.
And that is the fundamental problem, is that we have a program which is 30 years old, Medicare, this week. And that system was designed in 1965 to allow senior citizens access to the care that was available to others. Well, the system has progressed, matured, expanded to many, many different options, yet today we still have this 1965 system in place. We're going to keep that there for people who want fee-for-service, but we need to expand those options, expand those choices that other private citizens have today.
Now the President has kind of backed away from that and basically washed his hand and said we're going to look at the Republican proposals and then condemn whatever they are. But he's tried to tie it into an overhaul of the entire health care system. And I believe that we can make fundamental improvements in Medicare without tying it to a political wagon that says, no, we want socialized medicine in this country. Do you agree that there are things and steps that we can take immediately to begin the improvement process?
There is no question that the American people absolutely rejected the President's plan last year, which is big government, micromanagement, taking away choice from individuals. That was rejected. We have already begun that battle today. In the private sector, for private insurance, a bill has been introduced to address pre-existing illness. If somebody has heart disease, they'll be able to get insurance. To address portability, and in Medicare, we've begun to address that, to what we were talking about in terms of expanding choice, and in Medicaid, to allow states to have more flexibility in designing the programs that they want.
I just want to read something before we go to a break, and this is what the President said in October of 1993. The President said, today Medicaid and Medicare are going up 3 times the rate of inflation. We propose to let it go up 2 times the rate of inflation. This was the President's proposal just 2 years ago. That is not a Medicare or Medicaid cut, he said at the time. So when you hear all this business about cuts, let me caution you that that is not what is going on. All of a sudden now the President and others of his party, when Republicans say, well, this is one thing we agree with, we have to keep it at twice the rate of inflation, all of a sudden it's a cut. But I think, again, John, as you mentioned, I think once the program is laid out, and as you mentioned, Bill, the costs and the amount of money that we're going to continue to spend to meet the needs of our seniors, but then also to preserve the plan to make sure that it's there for the seniors tomorrow, for the seniors 10 years from now and beyond. So,
and we need the President to participate with us in this. This needs to be a bipartisan approach, and we need to develop a consensus in this country because it's important for all of us, for us and for the people that are currently on Medicare.
2 heads are better than 1. So we'll be back in a moment. We'll take another break, and we'll be back with our guests, Senators Jon Kyl of Arizona and Bill Frist of Tennessee, in just a moment.
Your approach is looking good, Cobra.
The men and women in the National Guard and Reserve face some tough challenges when they serve. Challenges that teach them discipline, leadership, and technical skills that make them better employees. So when they need time off to serve, don't make their toughest challenge approaching you.
Isaiah Thomas, Kevin Costner, Mr. Wong.
These are teachers, but to the kids they've reached, they're heroes.
My hero? Mrs. Wooten. If I don't get through to that child, who knows, maybe no one else will.
Teachers have the power to wake up young minds, to be heroes, to make a difference. Reach for that power. Teach. Find out how by calling 1-800-45-TEACH. Be a teacher. Be a hero.
Again, our special guests this week, Senators Jon Kyl of Arizona and Bill Frist of Tennessee. And again, gentlemen, thank you. Before we leave, we've got about 6.5 minutes to go, but talk a little bit about some of the bills that are confronting the Senate right now and where we stand in regulatory reform. I think is one of the important bills that we're dealing with. John?
I might mention that starting out because, as I mentioned in the beginning, that's what kind of got me into politics. I was so frustrated in having to deal on behalf of clients and businesses that the Chamber of Commerce represented with regulations that were stifling our free competitive spirit. That's really what got me motivated in the first place to get involved in politics. And we're now trying to do something about that, to reverse years of unnecessary regulations, over 69,000 pages of regulations in the Federal Register. One of our colleagues has a bill to put a limit of 10 million words of regulations, and I said, well, I'd like to co-sponsor that bill. How long will it take us to get there? He says, that'll mean we'll have to cut current regulations in half. So I think it illustrates the fact we've got a big problem, and this bill will help us to resolve that problem. But unfortunately, although all Republicans supported getting it to a vote, we still fell short because very few Democrats would join us, and we really need for Democrats to join in this effort with us.
Bill on regulatory reform.
Well, again, in my campaign, it was really to get, as you said, government off our backs and out of our pockets. And in my campaign, it was off our land. And in all three of those areas, it boils down to increasing government regulations, with those regulations attempting to micromanage our lives every day. I was very enthusiastic a couple of weeks ago when it looked like we were going to get this current regulatory bill through, and the fact that it's been slowed down because we haven't had the 60 votes has been discouraging, although our whole theme over the next 2 years is going to be to cut down on the number of regulations, get government out of our everyday lives, and that's what all of us will continue to fight for over this Congress.
I just want to put that in some numbers. You know, we spend about $600 billion a year, it's estimated, in government regulations and mandates. Now, if you would say half of those are good, because we do have cleaner water, cleaner air, and a lot of these mandates are well-intended, and we are getting some good results, but a lot of it is wasted. If we could even just capture half of that waste, it would mean about $4,500 to $5,000 per family. Now ask an average family in Tennessee or Arizona or Minnesota what they could use that other $4,500 or $5,000 a year on: education, savings, medical care, a new car, you know, some other things that they want. So it can make a big difference. So we are talking a lot of dollars that we believe are being wasted, and we could still protect some of the things that are very important. Welfare reform, Bill.
Well, I'm very hopeful that we'll see a significant welfare reform.
It's on the docket for August 7th,
on the docket for just several weeks from now. And I think nobody has the answer today to welfare reform, and that's the whole point. I think that we need to return much of this responsibility back to the local level, starting at local churches, schools, families, and building up to the state. We do not have the solution here in Washington, D.C.
Welfare reform is going to be an issue. Can we move it through enough to get it done before the break?
We all hope so. We'd like to have some kind of a break so we can go home and visit with our constituents, and we won't have much of a break if we have to continue to work the welfare reform bill right on through August. But we ought to be able to do it. We all share the same goal, and if we can work in a bipartisan way, we can get it done. Generally, we want to return more of the authority along with the funds directly to the states in the form of block grants. It seems to me that since we agree on the general goals, we'd ought to be able to agree on the specifics, to make work a requirement, to try to do something to strengthen the families that both of you mentioned. And I think we can get it done, but it'll take a lot of hard work.
What about term limits? This is something I ran on. I think it's very important because of trying to return this Congress to a citizen-type legislature rather than the professional politicians that we hear a lot about. And it does make a big difference. Surveys have showed that the longer you're here, the more you believe that government is the answer and the more you're willing to spend of other people's money to push those programs through. But term limits, Bill, how important?
Well, I'm very hopeful we will see term limits at some time over the balance of this century. I've been a big advocate. I ran on it. I've committed to serve 6 years, maybe 12 years, and then to leave the United States Senate. And I do think if there's one type of reform that we could accomplish that would literally change the way Washington does business, as well as affect the type of business we do, it would be term limits. And I'm an advocate. We'll bring it back to the floor, hopefully over the period of this Congress, and continue that debate. And hopefully sometime in the balance of this century we will pass it.
I think it's foolish to believe, John, that there aren't other good people that could serve in the Senate besides you and I or some of our predecessors, that there are a lot of qualified people. We feel very fortunate and grateful to be here at this time hoping to make a contribution. But there are a lot of good people.
And a lot of us won't serve our entire lives like some of the people who have served before us. And we only intend to serve for a limited period of time. And you're right, there are a lot of good people, as we saw by the people in our freshman class this year, which is one reason I'm glad we put a limit on the number of terms that a person can serve as chairman of a committee now. That will help to move the power around and mix things up here in the Senate as well.
We only have about a minute left, and I wanted to save this question to the end because this program is going to be carried for about the next 30 days, well into August, in Bosnia. Is a very important question. We are going to be addressing it now, coming up here on the 25th of July, and hoping to get a vote on lifting the arms embargo, but trying to find some answers just quickly in 15 seconds. John, what about Bosnia?
I think by the time this is aired in Minnesota, the resolution to lift the arms embargo will have passed, but the effect of that probably will not be felt for many weeks because the president probably won't issue the orders necessary to really effect it. As a result, I am afraid that we're going to continue to see the carnage that we've seen. Just the fact of voting to lift it perhaps will help some people get arms to the Muslims so they can defend themselves.
Bill, in 30 seconds.
It is clearly not in our vital security interest to be in Bosnia today. I too favor lifting that arms embargo. I think to do otherwise would not do justice to the people there in that part of the world. What the outcome will be remains to be seen. We need to avoid loss of American life.
We can't stand by and watch what's going on. Gentlemen, I want to thank you both for being here and taking your time. Senator Jon Kyl of Arizona, Bill Frist of Tennessee. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. We'll be back next week. We'll see you then, or next month. Bye.